Hey everybody, in this video I want to show you the basics of navigation in 3D space and moving and manipulating and creating objects in your three-dimensional scene. In my last video I talked about creating projects and scenes. So if you want to make a new project and a new scene, watch that video. And then from a brand new clean slate project and a brand new scene, the simplest way to get started is to create a cube. So in the scene hierarchy, click the Create menu and select 3D Object Cube. Now that we've got a cube, let's look at the inspector for the first time. Keep in mind, since this is a lot of information, and since all of Unity has a lot of detail and content, I'm going to show you some things that you can safely ignore for a while. One thing is the mesh filter. You can almost always ignore that for now. Another thing is in the mesh renderer, the only thing I usually mess with is the material element 0. But we're not even going to mess with that in this video. I just wanted to point to it. Otherwise, you can minimize that too. And the way to minimize things is you can click on the title or this arrow. And colliders are really important. So I mess with colliders all the time, but we don't need to do that today either. Today, we just want to look at the transform. And the transform is always just three things: position, rotation, and scale in 3 dimensions, X, Y, and Z. Now for starters, it's pretty easy to manipulate this cube in 3 dimensions using the transform in the inspector itself. For example, you can make it 3 times as long in the X dimension, or 10 times as high in the Y dimension. And although it's somewhat hard to show rotation with a cube, you can rotate it 30 degrees or 45. And when I say rotate it 30 degrees in the X-axis, what that means is rotate it around the X-axis by 30 degrees. You can also go negative. You can go 90. You can't see that with a cube. You can go 300. You can go 600. You can go negative 1000. Negative 962, 5, whatever you want. And another way to use the transform in the inspector is on each of these X, Y, and Z labels, you can click the mouse and drag it. So for example, I can rotate around the Z-axis by clicking and dragging. And you can see it's not moving very fast, but it does move. You can do the same for scale. And if you hit the side of the screen, it doesn't stop you. You can keep dragging. And Control Z or Command Z undoes most anything you change in the inspector. Now that's a quick overview of how you can change things in the inspector for rotation and scale. For position, it works the same way. If I say a 1 here, it moves 1 in the positive X direction. If I say negative 1, it moves back. If I say negative 10, it moves negative 10 in that direction. Well, Y moves up. And negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, it moves down. And Z moves what I would call in and out. At this point, I want to talk a little bit about what these axes mean. And to do that, check out this widget in the top right. It says Y and it's a green arrow. It says X and it's red. And it says Z and it's blue. And if I'm thinking back to high school, I would think of X going off to the right in the positive direction and Y going up. And in that case, Z would go into the screen. Well, if you click on this X, then it focuses in that direction. If you click on Y, then it focuses straight down the Y-axis. If you click on Z, then it focuses straight down the Z-axis. But if you want to rotate around the Y-axis, you can click on this one on the right. And at this point, I've gotten to the point where Y is up, X is to the right, and therefore Z is behind us. And it's straight into the screen, from your eyes through the screen. At this point, it's a little bit easier to visualize rotation around the Z-axis since we're looking straight down the barrel of the Z-axis. So if I grab this and rotate it, you can see it moving. And if I undo it, it goes right back to where it was. Now in the scene view, there are other ways of manipulating the transform. And so we can see this better. I'm going to rotate the camera up a little bit in the scene view. This is one of the most important things that you'll need to practice in Unity, is affecting the camera. So first I'm going to show you how to affect the camera in the scene view, and then I'm going to show you affecting the transform of that cube from the scene view. So the first thing to show you about affecting the camera is the scroll wheel on your mouse zooms in and out straight into the scene. Scrolling down goes this way, and scrolling up goes this way. Now middle click and right click do important things. Middle click, from the perspective of the camera that's looking at this, the scene camera, it grabs the current scene and moves it around, moves the camera, shifts the camera left, right, up, and down in whatever plane it's already on. And right click angles the camera in a different direction. So using combinations of angling and zooming and angling again and zooming and shifting with right mouse button, middle mouse button, and the middle scroll wheel, you can look at any angle of any object. However, there's a few more keys that let you control things quite a bit more adeptly. While you're in the same view, if you right-click, which usually rotates the camera around like this, and while you're right-clicking, use the WASD keys as arrow keys, then you can move quickly around your scene like this, left and right, and forward and back. This is usually how I do it. So if I wanted to rotate to that side, I would do that. It's a combination. It's kind of an interesting playful way to get around the scene. And for me, it's actually kind of fun. Now that you can navigate around your scene using the scene perspective, the scene view, I want to show you a little more about manipulating the transform of this cube using the scene view controls. Up here in the top left are the tools that are available to help you do this. And the ones that I use are these three: move, rotate, and scale. And I use a combination of these three tools and typing things in the transform and dragging in the transform inspector to do almost all of my positioning of objects in my scene. There are keyboard shortcuts for each of these. For the move tool, it's W. So if I select the cube and press W, then I get this tool. That's what it looks like. If I press E, it selects the rotate tool, and if I press R, it selects the scale tool. So pressing W again gets me back to this tool, and this one's the one I use the most actually. You can see up in the top right that Y is green, X is red, and Z is blue. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but if you get, there we go. Now, what that means is that those letters and colors correspond to these as well. So if I want to move it on the Z-axis, I can grab this arrow right here and click it with my left mouse button and drag it around wherever I want. And I want you to watch right here in the inspector as I do that. Watch over on the right it follows it directly and very precisely. And you can see that this arrow is red, so it corresponds to the x-axis. So this value is going to change if I grab this red arrow. It moves it along the axis that you've just selected. Same with the y. I'm going to zero these out. Actually, the easiest way to zero things out when there's a lot of them is to right-click this little gear and either say reset position or reset, which resets all three in the transform. Now the other interesting thing about this tool is the red, blue, and green. I call them pockets on the planes themselves. So what these do is move the object on the planes that are not the selected color. So this red pocket here is the x-axis. So it's going to move this object on the y and the z planes only and exclude the x-axis. And you can see over on the right that the inspector, sure enough, is leaving the x alone. And if I'm going to move it, if I move this object several over on the x, this will still only move it on the x-axis, on the other than the x-axis. Now these work the same way. The blue moves it on every axis except the z-axis, and the green moves it on every axis except the y-axis. And considering that I'm often positioning things on a flat plane surface, the one that's green, that's the one I use the most often, personally. The other most valuable part of this tool is when I hold down the Control or Command keys, then it uses a snapping function. So if once again I reset these values, watch that now the values don't change except by increments of 0.5. Now that's really useful for lining things up. Remember that because I use that all the time. If you want to change how much it moves, it doesn't have to be 0.5. You can go to the Edit menu and Snap Settings and change it here. Let's make it 1. Hold Command down and it moves by ones. Now the Rotate and Scale tools are similar in a lot of ways, but they look very different. The Rotate tool, you can see, it's hard to see, but you can see that there's a green circle here, a red circle going around this way, and a blue circle going around this way. Well, what those mean is if I grab the blue circle, then I'm rotating around the z-axis. Watch. See, the z on the right in the transform inspector is the only value that's changing. And I'm really just moving the mouse left and right, and it's rotating around and around and around. I'm going to undo that. And rotating around the y-axis works the same way. And rotating around the x-axis works the same way too. In that case, it's up and down that I'm moving my mouse. Undo. And there's also snap settings for rotation. So if I hold down Command, it rotates, I believe, in increments of 15 degrees. Looks like 45 degrees. The Scale tool, it scales the shape along the axis of the color that you've selected. So I can scale it along the z-axis, the x-axis, and the y-axis. And I can also do that if I reset. I can also scale using snap settings. Looks like it's going 0.25 at a time. So with that information, you can set up a scene pretty quickly. I can Command or Control D to make a bunch of cubes. I can use the W key and E is the rotate, and R is the scale. W key to switch to the transform tool, the position tool, and then I can take cube number 1 and move it over here. Cube, you can see that what I'm doing here, and then I can make them very different sizes. I hit R to make the scale tool. We've got some sort of interesting shape there really quickly. That's what I wanted to show you about navigation within the three-dimensional scene, and about placing objects within that scene and manipulating their transforms. In the next video, I'll show you how to add different primitives to the scene, how to store them down as prefabs, and how to apply many more prefabs to the scene to make the scene full of interesting shapes and creations. And I'll show you how to create a terrain that will act as a background, really a three-dimensional floor for your scene. I'll see you in the next video, and meanwhile, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like videos like this, please subscribe to my channel. I think you'll like some of the other videos that I have for you coming up in the future. Thanks.